I'm Barbara Peters. Welcome to another episode of the Criminal Calendar. It's seldom that we reprise our interviews with authors, but today we're making an exception with Anne Perry. Hi, Anne.
Thank you. Hello.
It's really a pleasure to have her here, and one of the reasons, aside from the charm of her company, that we are reprising her earlier interview is that she's doing something dramatically different, so it's almost like starting over.
It is, and that's what's fun. It really is a challenge. And one of the biggest challenges, well, two of the biggest challenges for me, one is to try to convey the truth of what it must have been like to be at war, and not soft pedal it and sort of fuzzy all the edges, and yet not make it so stark that people think, you know, I really don't need this. To get in the warmth and the friendship as well as the horror. And the other is, of course, soldiers are always men. And it's quite a challenge to write from a man's point of view in a man's world and not make them really women in trousers.
Ah, well, what we're referring to here actually is your quintet forthcoming about the First World War.
Yes.
And the very first book, which as we can see in the poster, which is called No Graves As Yet. I'm tripping over that because Dana Stabenow just published a book called A Grave Denied.
Oh.
And she was here a week ago, so I'm mixing up my graves.
This comes from a poem by Chesterton talking about the soldiers who fight for England being buried abroad and the workers who labour for England in the quiet churchyards, but the politicians, this is alas, alas for England, they have no graves as yet.
Very nice. Yes, I remember reading it in the book.
Yes.
You've written how many books now set basically in either middle Victorian or late Victorian?
In the high 30s, 35, 36, something like that.
It's really been a long time since I first read The Cater Street Hangman, which was your first...
79.
Was it 79?
Yes.
Well, as old as I am, I mean,
yeah, I know.
in the span of my life, it's
yes.
not that, you know, not that. But that's a long time today for a commercial fiction writer, you know.
Yes, it is. That's why I can't count how many books I've written. I've given up counting.
Well, very good move. I love The Cater Street Hangman. You introduced Thomas Pitt, your superintendent. Well, he wasn't then a superintendent.
He was junior to that.
Right. London
yes,
policeman,
yes.
and Charlotte, who was the spirited daughter
yes.
of a household in which a really awful murder had occurred.
Yes, and people keep asking me, will I let Pitt be promoted higher and higher? No, because then he'd be shuffling papers.
Actually, even as a superintendent, that's been a bit of a problem, hasn't it?
Yes.
Haven't you kind of shanghaied him into a different part of the service?
Yes, I have, so that he can do more active stuff, because it really isn't very interesting shuffling papers.
Right. I think you've had him, you know, into treason and
yes.
diplomacy.
Yes, and that's
is
kind of more
is it a
fun.
special branch?
Special
kind of
branch, yes. And I am, as we speak, more or less plotting the next one, which I need to start as I hit the ground running when I get home again at the end of October.
Well, that was going to be one of my questions. You signed up to do 5 books about
yes.
World War I, but one of my questions was going to be, what is going to be the fate of your 2 long-running series?
There'll be a World War I one every fall for the next, well, this year and the next 4, God willing, and I've turned in the second one, and there will be a Victorian one every spring, alternating between Pitt and Monk.
Oh, okay. So instead of doing the Monk in the fall and the Pitt in the spring,
yes.
as you've been doing, you're now
yes.
going to...
A Victorian one every spring.
And with William Monk, you started out with Face of a Stranger, and then in which we learned that, well, what we learned is we didn't know a lot about
yes.
William Monk because he
was
an
amnesiac.
Yes. Right, which is a wonderful ploy. I think because all the way through these books, up until the last one, one of the investigative threads was really who was William Monk.
Yes, because he kept tripping over evidence that proved he had said and done certain things, but he couldn't remember why. And some of them looked pretty ugly.
He didn't like himself a lot, did he?
No, not a great deal. But then perhaps if any of us saw only our actions through somebody else's eyes without knowing why we'd done what we'd done, then we might find ourselves less easy to like.
Very true, but I think an interesting arc in that series has been William Monk's journey towards being a different person, even though he doesn't know who he is. I think he probably
yes.
has made himself a kinder person.
That's what I hope.
A more compassionate
You're the first person to have phrased it that way, but that's what I'm trying to do. And it wasn't to be clever that I made him amnesiac. It was in order to explore himself very slowly with understanding and thinking, well, this I like and I hope it's true, and that I don't like and I fear it's true.
So he, even though he was a policeman, eventually has made his way out of the police force and set himself up
Yes.
as what you Brits would call a private inquiry agent, right?
Yes, yes. But the next one, which comes out in the spring, he has another, well, the beginning of another fairly radical turn.
Oh, he does.
Yes.
Well, in the one that you just wrote, the last book that you wrote for him, which was Death of a Stranger.
Yes. Excuse me, I wasn't going to call it that. I was going to call it Old Bones Buried Under, and my editor didn't like it. And he called it Death of a Stranger, and I was afraid people would think that was The Last Monk.
Well, you know, in some ways, I think what I thought it was after I read it, and it was that it was the last book in that story arc of Who Is He, because he finds out.
You're right, yes.
So in that sense,
Yes.
you know, it is
Yes.
it is the end of that sequence, but that also therefore presupposes it's a springboard for a new, right?
Oh, yes, right, yes. And later I will tell you what's new.
Oh, good. Well, I've always enjoyed the monks. There are fewer of them at this point than there are the
That's
pits.
because I did 10 pits before I started on the monks. I was with a different publisher and I published only one book a year because that's all they would take. And I didn't have the confidence to try something different. Then I moved to a different publisher and they gave me a lot more confidence.
You
And I
don't
thought,
seem to
"Keep
have
doing
trouble producing at that rate, but I think a lot of writers are really stunned by the fact that you are able to write so many books.
I really enjoy what I do.
You do. And it isn't that you're skimping. I mean, it's not like you're writing short books or or
They're getting
simple.
longer.
Well, they are, and they're complex too. So I think a lot of it, I'm wondering, is that you're so, by now, you're so at home in that Victorian landscape. You know, things that maybe you had to look up or think about way back just come naturally to you now.
I'm beginning to get a little more confidence and I'm beginning to learn how to do what I do, which is about time, isn't it?
I've always thought you knew what you were doing.
No.
But what I was actually just thinking was, you know, that you're obviously much more familiar, you know, with
I'm more familiar with plotting now.
Well, I was just thinking about the
Yes.
period. I mean,
Yes.
you know, you don't
Yes.
have to look up as much about
No, I don't.
Victorian as you used
No.
to. I mean, questions like, you know, what kind of street lighting do they have? You don't know that by now.
I'm never going to.
Forget it, right. So that maybe things that, you know, sort of more like pure research questions. I hope you noticed I pronounced that in the proper British way.
Yes,
Research.
you did, didn't you? You did, didn't you? Not research.
That's
Yes,
right. I'm
yes,
able to
yes.
shift
You're
gears.
bilingual.
I am.
So am I, but I usually get it the wrong way around. I always have bonnets and boots where I should have hoods and trunks, or the other way around.
Ah, well,
Or
yes,
hoods and
we
yes.
are indeed one, you know,
Yes.
two nations divided by a common language, or one
Yes.
people divided by a common
But
language.
fortunately, most people understand what I mean, even if it isn't exactly what I said.
Very true. But where was I?
Research.
That we're, you know, we're probably originally, when you weren't a sort of natural habitué of, you know, like
Books.
1880s
Yes.
London, you probably had to really stop and think about stuff, you know.
Yes. And I've also collected more and more books relevant. I have an entire room of the house, as you know, set aside just for books.
Right. Also, I think, you know, not physiognomy because it's a city, but the geography of
Yes.
London, while in many ways still the same, you know, is in many ways has changed. And so to know what it was like exactly, what buildings were where. And you've always called your books in the Pitt series, they're called after places,
Yes,
you
they
know,
are,
squares
yes.
or streets or
I'm
something.
running out of, I mean, I've got street and road and park, and I haven't got an avenue because there's only Shaftesbury Avenue is about the only one I can find.
Oh, good
and
point. You've
lane
had, you've had a close.
Yes, and gardens and squares and crescents and.
What's left? Row. You've had
I've
Southampton.
had rows, yes. I've had 2 rows, I think. Walk. Yes, it's difficult.
Even house, didn't you? I know you've had, was it Ashworth Hall? No, it was Hall.
Yes, Hall, yes, because I took them out into the country a
You
little
took
bit.
them out to the country, so we
Yes,
had that
yes.
sort of country house thing.